Vishal Goyal, Executive Director of UBS Securities, joins us right now to speak about that. Vishal, good having you. Thanks so much for taking the time out and joining us. Let's start off with talking about what you did best the last year, and probably we'll do this next year as well. And talking about earnings, we'll come to individual movers in a bit, but how do you expect Q4 to shape up for banking in particular?
I think Q4 will be kind of mixed. We are expecting overall 14-15% earnings growth if I exclude SBI, because SBI last year was being like kind of a zero kind of profit. So if you exclude that, then you see the 14-15% earnings growth for the sector as a whole. Again, PSU banks earnings in general would be subdued, again except SBI. When I look at the NII line, you would see that margins again for most of the banks would be either flattish or declining a bit. So I think on NII side you should expect slightly muted growth. So I think on earnings side, the key focus actually of the investors would be on the NPL and restructuring, given the pressure on the system as a whole. On NPL, my view is that we are kind of seeing plateauing of NPL. Already PSU banks are showing very high NPL additions. They are most likely to show either similar NPLs or slight decline in NPLs this quarter and quarters going forward. Private banks again are sounding very confident on their NPL and asset quality. There would be slight increase but not a dramatic increase for them in terms of NPLs. While at the restructuring, we've got many big restructuring happening in this particular quarter, like Air India, KS Oil, Bharti Shipyard, and many large ticket restructuring. So you should expect restructuring outstanding to go up in this quarter.
So leave aside SBI, we'll talk about that in greater detail. PSU banking, Vishal, you think it will be a subdued quarter per se because of all the problems that you did highlight, and maybe some unforeseen ones that could crop about as well? Because Q3 was a pleasant surprise. Not too many people expected the banking to do what it did. You think Q4 would be a bit of a disappointment for PSUs in general?
Yeah, I think I'm not overall too bullish on PSUs except SBI. And I think one is the margins. Second would be, of course, the large ticket restructuring, I think, which could surprise negatively the markets, at least on PSUs.
Among PSUs as well, do you have relative strength seen in stocks or banks such as State Bank of India, perhaps?
I think if you look at private sector banks, each bank, for example, if I think of HDFC Bank, IndusInd Bank, there is no change in their NPL situation at all, even Kotak Bank for that matter. But if I look at, let's say, ICICI and Axis Bank and even Yes Bank, ICICI might see some increase in restructuring, which they have been talking about for some time. Axis Bank is sounding very confident on their restructuring plus NPL, so there shouldn't be any significant increase there. Yes Bank I'm expecting very good NPL numbers for them also. So again, for private sector banks, I think they're slightly more predictable, and also I think they are looking very confident on asset quality numbers.
I'm giving you a hypothesis, Vishal, that the private sector earnings come out exactly the way you believe they will. Post the earnings, let's say we're talking on the 1st of May and all the earnings have come out. What is it that you find favor with? I mean, do you like large private sector banks like an HDFC Bank, which is trading at premium valuations? Or is there a case for buying maybe some of these smaller ones like a Yes Bank? Where do you find favor?
I actually would go for something like Yes Bank, Federal Bank and Axis Bank kind of names, where people are not that positive. Yes Bank people are positive, but for different reason. I like Yes Bank. Let's stick with Axis and Federal Bank, where I think the NPL concerns are very much. I think investors are too worried about their NPLs, and both of them can surprise positively on their asset quality, is my belief. Yes Bank, I think the reason we like it is because of the CASA accretion they are seeing, especially after the savings rate deregulation. I think they can surprise streets on their savings account numbers. So though earnings may not be too different from what people are expecting, but I think the savings account or CASA trend, I think, could surprise people.
Yeah, what about the outlook on margins for both public sector as well as private sector banks in lieu of the expectation that we just had in a Reuters poll talking about perhaps more analysts believing that there would be a rate cut in the credit policy?
Okay, I think again different drivers for different banks. For example, a policy rate cut is negative, or basically when you see rates going down in the system, it is generally negative for margins for PSU banks, not so much for private sector banks. And that's mainly because most of the private sector bank, at least like ICICI, Yes Bank, Axis Bank, they depend on wholesale deposits for their funding. So that get repriced downwards when the rates go down. So that in fact helps them in margins. While for PSU banks who got slightly larger, you can say floating rate loans, they see a negative traction on margins when rates go down.
Okay, Vishal, why SBI? I mean, by virtue of it being the largest bank, yes, but the news flow around the stock doesn't cease to come down. I mean, do you like it purely by virtue of the valuations that it's trading at and by virtue of the fact that, hey, I mean, the economy is growing at 6-7%, so banking would do well as well? Or are there specific triggers that you believe will come into a State Bank of India over the course of the next 6 months?
I think it is more a specific call here. If you see, my earnings estimates for SBI are 15% higher than consensus for this particular quarter. And that I believe is mainly because consensus or street is very negative on SBI. Maybe they are obviously given the Q3 numbers on NPL and some confusion around their margins. I think people don't believe that they will do very good numbers. My expectation is that they can do around 4,200 crores kind of profits versus 3,500 crore kind of consensus estimates. And I mean, and there are two issues here. For example, if you look at their NPL, last quarter they added roughly 6,000 crore of NPL net of recoveries and upgradations. This quarter that number could be anywhere around 3,500 crores. And that's where I think there will be big surprise for the street and investors. Plus on margins, I think people are maybe worried too much on their margins. I think they can definitely maintain or expand margins in this particular quarter. So I think that's where we are different on SBI in terms of numbers. And plus I think it's not very well owned bank. If you look at the FI ownership, etc., it's not the most liked bank.
What about Bank of Baroda in that case, Vishal? One, by virtue of the fact that they were 13% FI holding, and two, I mean, with the inclusion in the Nifty coming up, you think there will be lapping up of Bank of Baroda shares? I mean, purely by that trigger. I mean, earnings is a separate thing, and you'll probably talk about that as well. But do you like Bank of Baroda? There are a couple of points out here.
Maybe from a technical point of view, which you mentioned, you may want to like Bank of Baroda, which are valid points in the near term. But we are not very positive in the long term on Bank of Baroda for mainly two reasons. I'll just tell you, which is asset quality. One, I think they have been reporting very good asset quality, which to some extent you can give credit to them. But I think if the system is adding NPLs at 3 and 4%, you just can't sustain 1%, given they are also PSU bank. Second, their CEO also would be retiring in November. And so transitioning is not been very healthy in PSU banks. So these are the two reasons why, I mean, and plus I think on margins we see some pressure for Bank of Baroda going forward. So from a 12-month point of view, I mean, we don't like Bank of Baroda so much. But from near-term point of view, yes, I mean, you could see some appreciation because of technical reasons.
Okay, what about NBFCs then, Vishal? You know, especially auto finance companies, the Shriram Transport Finance, or even for that matter, and M&M Financials. What would be your view there?
I think Shriram Transport we like. We think it is a very well-run company. Plus, they are kind of monopolistic segment. So we like the business model. We like the company. I think it's just that the cycle has been weak, and therefore the growth rates have come down for them. And in fact, there have been some regulatory pressure on the PSL, securitization, etc. So I think all that is weighing down on Shriram Transport. But I think it's a good business model as such. And if for example, if you get it below 2 times book or around 2 times book, I think it's an attractive investment.
Okay, Vishal, out of time completely. One word answer. If you had to put your money, if you had to advise putting money in one stock in the banking space, which would it be?
What is the horizon?
12 months.
Or the time horizon?
12 months to 18 months.
12 months to 18 months. I think I'll go for Federal Bank. which is our key call. I mean, if there's no restriction of the size.
Oh yes, indeed. So Federal Bank it is. Great. Vishal, really appreciate you taking the time out and joining us, and congratulations once again for being the best earnings estimator in the financials category for the year gone by. Thanks so much for taking the time out.